By 2074, Vault-Tec was already running experiments on American citizens underground 3 years before the bombs fell. While peace negotiations were still active, children were being harvested for organs inside facilities their parents thought were shelters. And buried deep in the terminals across 7 games in a TV series is evidence that the people who designed all of this knew the war was coming before the government did, before the military did, before anyone. That's not the darkest part. 7 levels. One question underneath all of them. Did Vault-Tec need the apocalypse to happen, or did they make sure it would? Level 1. The measurement. Vault-Tec told the public their vaults were shelters. What the engineers actually built was something different: facilities where death wasn't a risk to manage. It was the variable being measured. Vault 12 had one distinguishing feature. The door was rigged not to seal. Not a malfunction, a deliberate design choice. Radiation poured in continuously, transforming every resident into ghouls. Vault-Tec filed it as a radiation exposure test. That's what they called it, a test. Vault 106 went further. The psychoactive gas wasn't released in response to anything, it was pre-programmed. Control sequence 46-2A set to initiate at exactly 15:30 on a date written into the Vault's operating code before a single resident moved in. When the terminals say head to designated locations, they're not sounding an alarm. They're running a script someone wrote calmly at a desk, before any of those people existed to the engineers as anything other than variables. The gas hit, residents hallucinated, and then they started eating each other. The terminal logged it, expected progression. Vault 94 was filled with pacifist people who believed in nonviolence as a principle. The council voted repeatedly to arm themselves, to seal the vault. Every motion failed. When the door opened, raiders came for the GECK and killed everyone. The last terminal entry, motion to seal vault, failed. Then Vault 51, where an AI called ZX spent years specifically selecting residents for leadership qualities under crisis. Every single one killed each other. These weren't experiments that failed. The failure was the experiment. Vault-Tec wasn't measuring survival. It was measuring death: how fast, how violent, how predictable. That's what they did to strangers. What they did to children requires its own level. A level 2. The children. Vault 75 had a cover story, and it was a good one. A safe shelter for children from Malden Middle School. Subsidized admission for families. Vault-Tec brochures showing kids in clean hallways, smiling. Bring your children. We'll protect them. Parents who arrived at Vault 75 were separated from their children at the door and killed. Not turned away, not detained. Executed bodies incinerated in a separate facility before their children reached the elevator. Inside, the children were sorted by genetics and physical fitness markers the Overseer's team had decided in advance. The ones who passed were kept for experimentation, organ harvesting, genetic sampling, tissue extraction, running from ages 10 to 18. The ones who didn't pass were kept until 18 anyway, then killed in what the logs call a graduation ceremony, and incinerated in the same furnaces as their parents. The Overseer's logs read like quality control reports: quotas, harvest schedules, incineration capacity. Children who survived long enough were eventually recruited to the science team because the most efficient researchers are the ones who grew up inside the machine and never knew anything different. Vault 111 was quieter. Residents were told suspension was temporary. The terminals confirm it was never meant to end. Indefinite cryogenic study, lives dissolving outside while they slept. A man named Kellogg came for a child while the parents were frozen and helpless. The mother never woke up. And then the Institute replacing children with Gen 3 synths for decades. The real children were taken. Yeah, the railroad's logs. They take families, replace the kid. What happened after isn't documented. The Institute didn't keep those records. There was no line. Across 3 organizations, across decades, the answer to would they do this to children was always yes. The line people assume exists, the one where even the worst stop was never there. We'll come back to the Institute in Level 5. What they did to adults is worse. Level 3. Still alive. Harold remembers the old world. He'll tell you it wasn't all bad. He's been saying it for 200 years because Harold can't die. Radiation became ghoulification. Ghoulification became something worse. A tree called Bob, growing out of his skull, roots threading through his body, anchoring him to the ground. He can't move. He just exists, talking to anyone who passes. Occasionally asking them to burn him alive so it'll stop. In Fallout 3, that's the kindest thing you can do for him. Raul Tejada is 400 years old. He's watched everyone he ever loved age and die while he stayed exactly the same. I've outlived everyone I've ever cared about, he says flat, because he's said it too many times for it to mean anything anymore. Fox was a scientist in Vault 87. He remembers the work, the colleagues, The person he was before FEV turned him into something 8 feet tall that makes people run. The fear of what he was becoming eventually stopped. The memory never did. Nick Valentine carries a dead man's life in his head, pre-war detective, pre-war grief. None of it belonging to the synth body walking around with it. Am I a synth, or am I Nick Valentine? I don't know anymore. The tragedy isn't the confusion. It's that the question might not have an answer, and he keeps living anyway. Then there are the ghost people of the Sierra Madre residents caught in the cloud, a toxic red mist that corroded flesh while fusing hazmat suits permanently to bone and muscle. They didn't die. The suits wouldn't allow it. Still moving through the casino 200 years on. Still screaming when damaged. The terminals call it containment failure. The ghost people might have another word for it if the cloud hadn't taken their voice. The apocalypse created a category of existence that hadn't existed before. People for whom death became structurally impossible. Not metaphor, not exaggeration. They cannot leave. None of them asked for it. The same logic runs through everything that follows. Build something inescapable, give it a name, and keep counting. Vault-Tec counted 99 times before anyone said stop. Level 4. Filed under success. In the final year of Vault 11, something remarkable happened. The residents refused. After generations of electing overseers and watching them walk to the sacrificial chamber, raising children who would do the same, the survivors voted not on who to sacrifice, but whether to at all. For the first time in the Vault's history, they said no. The terminal responded immediately. No further sacrifices required. They were free to leave. It also noted without drama that a nuclear failsafe would activate for non-compliance. 5 residents volunteered to die so the others could walk out. Those 5 are still in the sacrificial chamber. The ones who left disappeared into the Wasteland within a week. 200 years of surviving everything Vault-Tec designed ended by the open air. The Vault 11 terminals don't read like horror. They read like meeting minutes, dry, procedural, motion passed, sacrifice recorded, 99 overseers in 2 centuries, and the paperwork stayed consistent the entire time. That's the thing most people miss. Vault 11 worked. The experiment wasn't what happens when people are forced to sacrifice each other. It was, will they stop? For nearly 200 years, the answer was no. That's what Vault-Tec wanted. That's what they got. Vault 92 ended the same way. The overseer's notes confirm that by the end, subjects no longer recognized family members, no longer responded to voices they'd known for years. White noise had rewritten them completely. Vault-Tec sent no rescue team, no follow-up. The vault was sealed and the file was closed. Vault 106's gas protocol executed exactly as written. Hallucinations, violence, cannibalism, all within expected parameters. Control sequence 46-2, A performed as designed. These weren't tragedies, they were deliverables. And the organizations that built them weren't finished, they were just getting started. Level 5. Compliant. Before the war, a group of scientists at Big Mountain Research decided that the human body was an obstacle, too fragile, too mortal, too limited by biology. So they removed it. Not all at once. Piece by piece, eyes first, then spine, then the digestive system, then organs. Eventually everything that could be taken, even until only the brain remained, suspended in a tank, wired into robotic housing. They called this an upgrade. They called themselves the think tank. Dr. Klein oversaw most of it, running experiments on human subjects while systematically dismantling his own body in pursuit of the same immortality he was trying to understand. Here's what breaks the horror open. They forgot they'd done it. The centuries stripped them of the memory of what they were. By the time the player finds them in Old World Blues, the think tank are arguing about junk food and running experiments on lobotomites, apparently unaware they were ever human. Dr. Klein doesn't know. Dr. 8 doesn't know. 200 years of vivisecting human subjects in a facility they can't leave, in bodies they built for themselves and then completely forgot. The lobotomites are worse. Yeah, because they didn't choose it. The autodoc removed their brains while they were conscious. The terminals log each procedure as routine, the word compliant appearing after every entry. They still react to pain. Their bodies still move. Something is running inside them, but it isn't them not anymore. They wander big MT indefinitely because the same procedure that destroyed them also preserved the shell. Now the Institute. This is what we mentioned in Level 2. A Gen 3 synth begins with an abducted human, skin harvested, skeleton replaced, the completed assembly walking out with the taken person's face, voice, possibly their family. The terminal logs the process as harvesting dermal layer. The human who provided that layer isn't mentioned again. The body goes somewhere the records don't describe. No guardrails. No one left to say stop, because the people who might have said it had already removed their own brains and forgotten why it mattered. What the think tank and the institute share beyond the methods, beyond the terminals, beyond the body horror, is that neither of them ever stopped. No oversight arrived. No one came to shut it down. And two of the organizations funding this work had already written a plan for what humanity would look like when the experiments were finished. Level 6. The Selection. Two organizations working independently designed a solution for humanity's future, and both of them arrived at the same answer. The Enclave's version was chemical, a modified FEV strain introduced through the water supply, engineered to kill anyone with detectable mutation, which, in a post-nuclear wasteland, means almost everyone alive. Ghouls, super mutants, anyone whose genetics had shifted across 2 centuries of radiation. President Richardson called them abominations. His definition of pure human, pre-war American descent, no mutation, no biological adaptation to the New World. The projected death toll was effectively the entire living population of the wasteland. He said, remove the abominations, the way someone says, clear the table. Project Purity was the same plan with better infrastructure. President Eden wanted FEV introduced through the water purifier, the one thing the wasteland needed most, turned into an extinction delivery system. Colonel Autumn pushed back, not for moral reasons, but because he wanted control of the water, not its destruction. That disagreement between poison everyone and control everyone is the closest the Enclave ever came to an ethics review. And then Vault-Tec, running a parallel program with a longer horizon. Control vaults filled with engineers, doctors, specialists, the exact skill set needed to rebuild. Experimental vaults filled with everyone else. Vault 31 stocked with executives in cryo, managed by Bud Askins, designed to thaw in rotation and administer post-war society from the top. The org chart for the New World existed before the bombs. Vault-Tec had already written it and staffed it. 2 separate plans, both deciding who the human race would be. Neither asked anyone outside those rooms. This is what Level 7 is about, not just what they planned, but when they started planning it. Level 7. The question that changes everything. Let's put the timeline in order, because the timeline is the whole thing. June 2074. Vault 112 operational. Braun begins experiments. Now pre-war, Vault 11's sacrifice system, built into the structure during construction before a single resident moves in. Early 2076. Vault 92 conditioning active. FEV testing on American soldiers underway at Mariposa Military Base. 2077. Vault 75 organ harvesting operational. Vault 106 gas protocol pre-written into operating code. Peace negotiations between the US and China still active. War not inevitable. October 23, 2077. The bombs fall. For a long time, the story seemed straightforward: shelters built. War happened, chaos exploited, opportunistic evil. The timeline doesn't support that. The gas was written before the residents arrived. The children were being harvested before the bombs fell. The sacrifice mechanism was built into the walls before anyone moved in. None of this required the apocalypse. It was already running. Which forces the question Fallout has been building toward for 20 years. What happens to an organization that constructs a machine that only functions if civilization ends when civilization refuses to end? The 2024 TV series puts Vault-Tec, West-Tec, and Robco in a room in the final months of 2077. The experiments are running. The executives are staged for cryo. One executive asks quietly, "What if the bombs don't fall?" The room goes quiet. Canon doesn't confirm who launched first. Anyone giving you a definitive answer is guessing. But the canon confirms this. Vault-Tec had billions in infrastructure worthless without apocalypse. Experiments already running. Executives already in cryo. The post-war world already designed and staffed. Whether they pressed the button almost doesn't matter. They were ready. They'd been ready for years. And somewhere in the gap between ready and waiting is the darkest thing the terminals never say out loud. The thing you're left holding when you realize the question from the opening still has no clean answer. Was any of this an accident? 6 levels. Vaults built to kill. Children sorted and harvested. People locked in bodies they can never leave. Science that dismantled its own conscience along with everything else. And a plan written in secret by people who were never elected to anything for who the human race would be after the fire. 200 years later, the heirs of all of it are still running the wasteland. Still selecting. Still deciding who counts. The apocalypse didn't end the system. It was the system's first delivery.